Broadcasting live from the Murrow College of Communications. It's the Evan Pretzer Show. And now, your host, Evan Pretzer.
Hi there, folks. If you're just joining us, I'm here with TJ. He is a former member of the Cult of Scientology. Now, sir, to begin with, I've got to ask you, how did you wind up in this organization? Was it something that you were raised in, or did you join on your own?
I was raised in. That's exactly what happened. My parents were involved in the 70s, and, it's kind of interesting to talk about it as a different time, a different place. This is all pre-internet. This is all before a lot of what we know about Scientology even was written down in books. So I was not necessarily raised from it, involved in it in as early an age as some of the other people I grew up with. But by, between 8 and 12, I was being indoctrinated into that sort of thought process in that period, pretty early on.
Now, you know that you were raised in it. Did you go to a Scientology school as a child? And if so, what is the basic education like?
Starting around age 10 or so, because I was also having a hard time in conventional public schools, so that kind of also helped prompt the decision to put me in a strictly sort of Scientology study tech kind of school. It differs from your normal schooling in that everything is checklist based. It's kind of a variation on mastery learning, where you essentially set up your curriculum in a series of checklists and whatnot, and you go through and you complete stuff. So it's very thorough in that regard. So there are certain benefits that are easy sells for some people, because it is unconventional. It's not necessarily what you see in a normal school, and you can tell when somebody's falling behind very easily, and it's just a matter of supervising. Where it's different, and where I view it as actually dangerous, is in that with the study tech, there's an indoctrination on what a student should look like. This idea of this ideal situation of how a student should behave at all times, and they use various mechanisms that I'm not going to get into all the details on, various mechanisms to kind of enforce that and reinforce this idea, so that any variation from that can just be, oh, well, you actually have a misunderstood word, or that's the most common thing, or, you skipped a gradient somewhere. Those are the kind of the buzzwords and whatnot. And there's various remedies and an entire system that goes with this that I could just ramble on for hours and hours. But the idea is it already gets you to conform to certain ideals. It already gets you thinking in a certain mindset, even on that basic fundamental level.
Well, now, I've got to ask you, Scientology is an organization that's notable for the amount of celebrities and famous people that it recruits. Have you ever met any prominent individuals when you were with the cult organization? And do you have any stories?
Nothing too world-shattering. I've met a few. I don't want to get into a big detailed list of all who, but some of the usual names. Just mostly in passing. There's one that I was actually on a security detail on when they were visiting Los Angeles, and that was more or less uneventful. Celebrities do get definitely different treatment than your average Joe Public Scientologist. There's their donation structure is a bit different. They're given a lot more leeway and some ego boosting along the way. So they're definitely a different class of Scientologists when compared to your average public Scientologists.
Whose security detail were you on, just out of curiosity?
That was Eduardo Palomo. He's actually since passed away.
Oh. Now, you noted in a Ask Me Anything on Reddit that you served in the Sea Org division of Scientology, and for those who don't know, it's kind of a almost militaristic organization, so to speak. Some people have described it as that. Now, former Sea Org members claim that they are advised and sometimes even forced to have abortions in order to avoid being sent to a lower organization. Are you able to shed some light on any of those claims?
Yeah, I actually know a number of people just off the top of my head that are no longer involved that were coerced into having abortions. The policy actually started in 1996, if I remember correctly. Previous to that, you were allowed to be a Sea Org member and have children, but while the initial stages from until the child was about between 4 and 6, instead of serving in the Sea organization, you were sent to what's called a Class 5 organ, your standard kind of church that you'd find, like, say, in Phoenix or Las Vegas or Seattle. So it's much less intense, but it gives you the time to raise a child. And then once the kid is old enough to more or less self-comfort, then you'd come back, and the child would be put in the cadet org where they would be housed and schooled. By and large, you would see your kid probably once a week, every few days, sometimes less often depending on circumstances, sometimes more often depending on circumstances, but the average was pretty low, pretty dismal. So in 96, this was considered too much of a distraction. So the policy was instituted where if you got pregnant or you wanted to have kids, you were routed out of the Sea Org entirely. You had to deal with what they call the freeloader debt, so any auditing or training that you'd received as part of your conditions of being a member, you then had to pay for before you could continue with any further services. You had to deal with their own ethics and justice system. You were assigned what's called a lower condition for leaving. So there was a lot of pressure to deal with pregnancy as something that was unwanted. So even if it went against an individual's moral code of like, hey, I believe that this is something wrong, there's a lot of pressure put on several women to have abortions against their better judgment, so that they could serve the greater good, the greatest good for the greatest number of dynamics. So as it would be termed.
Jeez,
so it's pretty heavy.
I gotta have a drink after hearing something like that, man. I tell you, I've seen a lot of things in life, but that's messed up. Now, I've got to ask you, this is something that a lot of people, when I told them that I was going to be possibly speaking to a former member of the cult of Scientology for the show, they wanted to know your answer to this question. What is the most fucked up and the most heartening things that you saw while you were with the cult?
I can't go with any one thing, because it's not like, oh, I saw this one terrible thing happen. It's an environment where there's a lot of bad things that add up and end up culminating into a very, very bad situation. Probably that situation that I can speak most directly to would be the Rehabilitation Project Force. It is essentially a source of free labor for the church. If you're a member of the Sea Org specifically, this is not like your average Scientologist that pays money to do courses and reads books and gets auditing and is generally kind of seeking enlightenment and answers to life. If you're like part of the most dedicated core of Scientologists and you screw something up, or if you violate any number of rules you could be sent through various means to the RPF, as it's called, and you're put on a schedule of, first of all, you're cut off from the outside world. That's the first thing. Upon arrival, you don't have your driver's license. You have no identifying documents with you. You're not allowed to keep more than $20 on you at any given time. You are stripped of anything that would be considered a luxury item. You don't bring any books with you, no music, no nothing. You're issued your uniforms, which at the time consisted of black jeans, black boots, gray T-shirt. You could have your hygiene supplies. That was it. It was the very few things that you needed to actually be clothed and housed in a dormitory. At one point, I was housed with 30 other men. Our schedule was, wake up at 6 a.m., do some cleaning, rapidly get ready, start cleaning various areas until we were served breakfast at 6:30. Then there was, we did have 30 meals for a break. Not that there was always enough food or the food was even particularly edible, but it was there. And then from that point onward, depending on the time of the year and what was going on, we would either end up doing our enhancement program where we had to co-audit each other to make each other better. And once that was done, usually around noon-ish, there would be another break for a meal, and then it was 8 to 10 hours of work. We were never allowed more than 7 hours of time to actually sleep. So once the lights were off. We were under 24-hour watch. We were tasked with watching each other to make sure nobody had bad indicators or wanted to leave and other such things. It was 7 days a week. All communication in or out was monitored. There were times when there were special events or projects that needed to be completed because we were doing skilled labor. I learned a lot about electrical work, plumbing, carpentry. So there was some training involved, but the safety conditions were completely out of hand. Even though, by and large, we weren't allowed to use heavy machinery, the substitute would be to throw a bunch of people at it. Instead of doing something reasonable like, get a piece of heavy equipment, you'd have like 10 people tearing something apart. It was pretty intense. So there's the exploitation of it where you're completely cut off. You're completely in this mode of you have to make yourself and make somebody better to get out of there, and then all of the pressures and conditions of one minor mistake and you're assigned to do 20 push-ups or sit-ups. A larger mistake, you had to run a lap, which was about we were in great shape. We had to run everywhere. So it very physically grueling and completely cut off from society.
Now, I understand you were sent to the RPF for a violation, and you noted that during your time there, you had an incident with your eye. Could you tell us about that if possible? I recognize that it's a heavy topic, so.
It's heavy, but this was a while ago, and my friends and I, we kind of joke about it a lot. But I took a copper pipe to the eye. I completely blinded my left eye now as a result. The circumstances were one of the main buildings in Los Angeles was being converted and renovated for additional birthing space for Sea Org members. So, and that task largely fell on the RPF to do the work. So this is another example, rather than, getting some equipment to knock down walls, remove rubble, that sort of thing, in a short period of time, it was deemed, well, why don't we just throw a bunch of people at it? Now, the RPF consisted of about 200 people at any given time that I was on it, and it was about 215 people there at that time. And there was not nearly enough safety equipment. People were, only had a glove on one hand and had that, tried to keep the other in their pocket. There weren't, the safety glasses that were there were largely just scratched up. You couldn't see through them. The lighting conditions were terrible. Not enough temporary lighting, and there were 200 plus people crammed into about a 30,000 square foot space, tearing everything apart by hand. A few of us were lucky enough to have hammers, but by and large, I mean, people were literally throwing themselves at walls to knock them over and pulling drywall off and yanking studs apart. And it was under those circumstances, while I was navigating a pile of rubble, no safety glasses. Like I said, I was lucky. I got a hammer. And I was going over to the next thing that I saw that needed to be, knocked over. And, some people, friends of mine at the time, just yanking the studs of a wall apart that had some copper plumbing in it. And the pipe broke free and came right up, hit me right in the eye. So, and there was just unquestionably no coming back from it. After a couple of surgeries and whatnot, there was a detached retina. The eye was so... a friend of mine at the time, Adam, said that looking at it was unrecognizable as an eye. It had completely, it had actually popped. The insides had come out, no lens. The iris almost completely obliterated. If there's any kind of repair, it would need to be a very extensive. So, it was a pretty big ordeal. I did, like I said, I did get some surgeries and whatnot, and there were some attempts to fix it, but by and large, I've been completely devoid of any support as a result of that since well over a decade now.
Jesus. Now, when that incident happened, did the cult pay for any sort of medical treatment for you, or were you on your own?
It was through workers' comp. Because keep in mind also, I'm completely reliant on them. I have no outside income. I get, $12.50 a week just, to pay for hygiene supplies, maybe some vitamins and a pack of cigarettes. So it's, the whole idea of budgeting is a completely different concept at that point.
It is. Now, I want to jump around here. L. Ron Hubbard in the past referred to homosexuality as a disease of the mind, and a current Scientology website says, "He who destroys marriage destroys civilization." Now that rhetoric sounds very similar to what a lot of people opposed to same-sex marriage and gay rights, what they would say. So I've got to ask you, is there a lot of homophobia behind the scenes in the Church of Scientology? They claim that they're not, but what's it like when, the press aren't around?
There's a very strong undercurrent of homophobia. There's even when I was in high school in Scientology schools, there was a girl who has since disassociated and gone on to actually a fairly respectable acting career. That she, and obviously I'm not going to just blurt out names, but she came out as a lesbian. And, just the social circles, even of us as teenagers, most people just completely cut off all contact, just wouldn't have anything to do with her. Advocated for her to be kicked out of school, kicked off of campus even after she was kicked out of school, because she would come by and I want to meet with so-and-so because we're going to go get coffee or whatever. So even growing up in it, this is then the 90s, and even moving forward, it was any amount of homosexuality, bisexuality, anything that really broke that conventional gender norm was viewed as an aberration. It was you either, and this is the odd thing about it, is this is a cult, a religion that believes you've lived many times and that you've been many genders, and you've gone back and forth, you've lived lives as women, lived lives as men, and et cetera, et cetera. Yet in this life, if you're born with boy parts, you got to be a boy. If you're born with girl parts, you have to be a girl. That's it. No, just completely unquestioning. It's like, well, in the context of supposedly having existed for billions or trillions of years, however long, your individual quote unquote time track goes back. In that context, after all this time, why wouldn't there be a blurring of the lines? What's the point of these lines? Well, these rules were written in the 50s, when the U.S. was still really, really socially conservative.
Well said. Well said. I'm probably going to go with a couple more questions here, TJ, and then I'll let you go. If you're just joining us here on the Evan Pretzer Show, I'm speaking with a former member of the cult of Scientology. We're talking about his experiences in the organization and just what he thinks is some of the controversial things that the group has done through the years. Now, I've got to ask you, TJ, about the wife of the current leader of the cult. David Miscavige's wife, Shelly, has not been seen in more than 5 years in public. Now, recently, the former star of the show The King of Queens, Leah Remini, I hope I pronounced that last name right, filed a missing persons report, but the LAPD said it was without merit and unfounded. Do you believe his wife is dead? And also, how strong is church influence on the police and the government in Los Angeles?
Okay, well, several points. First, I believe her last name is pronounced Romani. Yeah, it's an Italian name. Secondly, I can't really speak to any personal opinion of whether or not Shelly Miscavige is alive, dead, or otherwise, because I don't have any direct contact. I've really done a lot to sort of insulate myself from church activities, as I can only lend some insight. The Church of Scientology has a very close relationship with the LAPD and a very close relationship with the LA Sheriff's Department. The LA County Sheriff Lee Baca is touted as an ally and given a lot of support from Scientologists individually who live in the area. They'll vote for him, that sort of thing. He ends up participating in Scientology-related events. There was recently in Los Angeles a campaign to distribute Way to Happiness handbook and literature throughout Los Angeles, and Lee Baca was personally involved in that. And the church also has been trying to get in good with other local churches, so and other religions. So they've made overtures towards even the Nation of Islam. It's like there's certain social justice things that we can trying to work together on, but this is all also in the context of trying to spread Scientology and Dianetics to those congregations as well by getting in touch with those leaders, those religious leaders in particular, and then also working with law enforcement to essentially grant themselves a certain amount of credibility. It's very convenient for them to be in good with law enforcement, because if anything should go wrong on one of their bases, they have contacts, and they regularly speak with representatives with the LAPD and the LA Sheriff's Department. They make sure that they have ongoing good relations with those people. So it is a close relationship. It's not. I can't really speak to how close, but it's always been kind of a known thing, and it's common knowledge within circles of Scientologists.
Wow. Now, in closing, I've got to ask you. You're obviously a very brave individual for speaking out about your experiences with this cult, because as we've seen in history and in the news, they do not like people who dare to criticize them. In the past, they tried to drive a former journalist who wrote critically of them by the name of Paulette Cooper insane. What do you fear they could do to you if you go public and reveal your name as other than just your initials of TJ? Do you think the Squirrel Busters and that's a god-awful name, to show up and harass you?
Well, I have taken. Here's the thing. I know what their playbook is. I worked at some of the higher levels within the organization. I may have been born at night, but it wasn't last night. So I know what their playbook is. I know what they could do. I have taken steps to kind of, make where I live and work not immediately known to them. I've taken steps to make things as hard as possible for them. But if they come at me, I'm hard pressed to think that anybody that they send to harass me can really look me in the eye for very long about it. So I'm not terribly worried about it. But also, their influence and their capabilities for such things has been on the decline. Currently, there is no spokesperson for the church. The last person was Tommy Davis, and he botched things so terribly that he's just persona non grata now. He was because of his family connections, he has a nice cushy job in the financial sector, but he's no longer involved in any church operations, and he's been replaced by nobody. And then the people that they might send after me, chances are I know them. And if they're not familiar with my story, I can make sure that they can do their homework. So I don't know if that's really the best answer, but it's an answer.
Well said, TJ. I want to thank you for speaking with me. You're a good man, and hey, don't be a stranger.
All right, sounds good. Thanks for your time.
Take it easy, my good sir.
All right, bye.
The Evan Pretzer Show will be back next week. Be sure to follow Evan on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Thanks for listening.